Hey everyone, welcome to the Troy Christian High School Chapel Podcast. At the end of this episode, please take a moment to subscribe to our Chapel YouTube channel and follow our Chapel Instagram account. Those two places will be the easiest way to check out what's coming up, as well as find some bonus content from our speakers and worship team. Most importantly, I hope the following message challenges and encourages you to grow in your relationship with God as you learn to love God and love others better. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, as you can tell, I'm sure by now, I am not Scott Smith, and for that I am truly sorry. Scott's taking the day off. He's at home, relaxing. I think he said he was going to go to IKEA. So, sending all our love and affection. I'm here with Tommy Royce. Tommy, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing okay, but not quite as good as I would be doing if I was just taking the day off and about to go to IKEA. So I'm doing okay.
Scott, we miss you. And honestly, that's the point of this whole podcast today. So today we are continuing kind of our thoughts from last week. We've been doing this series, Intentional Community in Chapel. Tommy, you spoke the first week, and you kind of talked about really just opening up that idea of what does it look like to be intentional in community? What does it look like to set that intention? This week we had student Maya Dilbone was on stage, and she was kind of talking about some practical hands-on experiences that she's had working with her nonprofit, doing the community food truck blessing boxes, and what does that look like, and how has the community showed up for her? And really kind of, I think we've talked a lot about this idea of what is community and what does that begin to look like for us as we try to establish that. But I think really one of the things that we could kind of get a little deeper on today is what is the value of community? We've talked a lot about, what does this look like, but what does it benefit me to be a part of the community? I think is kind of a big important thing.
A few things come to mind for me. One thing I mentioned in my message when I spoke was how there are things that are life-giving, and there are things that kind of feel like death. And a lot of the things that kind of have that negative, more death-like feeling come from being out of touch with community, feeling alone, feeling misunderstood, feeling abandoned or betrayed, and having a negative relationship with your community, not feeling like you can be your truest self in front of others, can be very kind of have a negative impact on your emotional, mental health. When something happens that, I don't know, if you have an experience where something happens and you want it to stay hush hush, that can kind of be a sign that you don't feel safe in your community to be a part of, to just be actually embraced and to be actually recognized and acknowledged, and kind of having that grace that should be available to you. And then at the same time, community can be very life-giving in that we kind of live in a world that says, you're not valuable, you're not important, you're not good unless you demonstrate otherwise. But community has the power to make people feel valuable and important and special and good enough, even without having earned it with an achievement or accomplishment or something along those lines. And so I think a lot of times in Christianity, we talk a lot about the importance of having your identity in Christ, and how, if you have your identity in Christ, you don't have to worry about being good enough, or if your failures will define you or not, or if even your successes will define you or not. And one of I think the beautiful things about community is that we get the opportunity to take on almost like God's role in our relationships and make others feel unconditionally loved, to make others feel like, hey, like your failures aren't going to keep me from loving you. Hey, your successes don't impress me enough that's why I like you. That who you are is valued, and what you do is not going to shake that. That's one thing that comes to mind.
Right. And I think especially to zero in on one aspect of that, the isolation part is huge. Some amount of isolation is a good thing from time to time. Some amount of getting away from people and kind of being by yourself and being able to kind of analyze who you are. But when that becomes the end all be all and you're away from your community, that's when you start to lose sight of who you are, because you're not totally individual and you're not totally community. You're somewhere in the middle. You're this weird mixture of both. And, I think a lot. I was thinking about this last week while you and Scott were talking. I was thinking about this psalm that I remember reading a few years ago, Psalm 73, where the psalmist is talking about like he has this issue of like realizing that everybody else is getting ahead in life, that people who are not following God, that people who are not doing the right thing are succeeding, and they're people who are like they're questioning God and they're walking away from him, and they're just like stabbing people in the back and doing everything that they can to incite violence. And he's kind of looking at it and being like, what's the point? What is the point of doing what's right? What is the point of continuing on in this way? Why should I even care when they're getting ahead and I'm not? And it feels like he's in this isolated place. And then in like the middle of the passage, he comes to this place of, and then I went to the sanctuary and I realized the end of all things. And I think for me, that's always like this coming back to community. I find myself in community because I'm not just hearing my own thoughts about my life or myself. I'm not just hearing only what God is saying to me. I'm hearing what God is saying to others. I'm hearing what others have to say about me. I'm hearing what God has to say to others about me. I'm finding a truer sense of who I am and who the world is. And it makes me feel more hopeful, right? Mm-hmm. Because I don't just see the people who are backstabbing and conniving and getting ahead in those ways. I see the people who are genuinely good. I see the people who are out there and who are trying and who are loving well. And I think that brings us back to a place of hope.
Yeah, I think one of the big benefits of community is keeping us grounded. When we're isolated, it is so easy to tie yourself to whatever narrative your brain is telling you of mm-hmm. I just think about maybe there could be days when I'm separated from people for too long. I start to see, what's the point of all this? I start to focus on the bad. And then all I need is the right friend or person in my community to show up and be like, actually, let me show you how you're not seeing it, because you're just clearly not seeing it right. I think our community sees our blind spots. Our community can prevent us from kind of getting stuck in the rut of whatever kind of negative story we're telling ourselves about what's going on in our lives. I think there's so much danger in what kind of negative trains of thought and ways we get stuck internally when we're by ourselves for too long and are in isolation. And that's why I think the church can be so important with mm-hmm. this, is that in your head, you can stay kind of in this place of everything's negative, everything's bad. And then, at least 1 hour a week, you're told, no, the tomb is empty, Christ is risen, and hope is on the way. And there is this grounding in reality that community can bring you that you can't bring yourself in isolation.
Right. And it's just having people there to carry it with you mm-hmm. is meaningful. Having people who are by your side and who are just, you're not going to carry this heavy thing alone. I'm here to lift you up. I'm here to lift this up with you. I remember between working for the last school I was at and working here, being in this place of being unemployed, and it had been a few months, it was starting to come into August, and I was with my house church at the time. And it was my first time really being a part of a house church and not being a part of just a small group or something, but being with a group of people who are meeting every week and doing meals together and worshiping together and just kind of generally checking in on each other and seeking God together. and having those people beside me to be like, hey, even though you've like sat on the shelf for a while, like you're still valuable. You're still important. We're here to pray with you. We're here to pray for you. We're here to, not just lift your voice to God about this, but we're going to lift our voices to God about this. And I remember just the comfort in the middle of that, not knowing that I experienced from that was overwhelming.
Yeah, I think one of the big benefits of community is how the support that you get when things go wrong and the celebration that joins you when things are going well. And more often than not, intentional community feels more like doing maintenance on something that's routine and average and normal. You're just kind of on cruise control in life. Work's okay, family's okay, nothing amazing, nothing terrible. And if you're intentional about connecting and growing as a community during kind of the mundane, ordinary seasons of life, when something negative comes up, you will be able to cash in on all the investment you made in your community during the mundane and ordinary seasons.
Right.
It's like, you will have people there for you. You will have people to support you. Unfortunately, what happens most of the time is that people will experience something really negative and then say, I wish I had community to support me in this. It's so helpful to invest your time and energy and just your relationships and in your community when things are more average and just okay or even good, to give you that safety net and that security, and that potential support when things are going wrong.
Right. I think of people who hit the day of the marathon and they haven't trained. And they're like, yeah, no, I can run this. I can run this. And they hit like maybe 3 miles deep. And then they realize like, I am not ready for this at all. Yeah. I'm totally unprepared for what I'm about to do. And I think it's very similar to when you experience these negative things and you don't have that community in place already, when you haven't been intentional in trying to build that, when that day comes, you'll still have people who will show up. You'll still have people in the day of your calamity that are like, hey, I'm here for you. I love you. I'm praying for you. But if you haven't done the work of like learning how to reach out to people, learning how to be among people like that, then it's all that much harder for you to start in that moment.
Yeah. And I think is at the same time, some of that calamity and those negative problems have the potential to be avoided if you lean into community before they arise. There's someone I know who last year at one point got divorced, and no one saw it coming. It must have been an internal, his issues in his marriage must have been just something he kept to himself. Even his wife had no idea that was what was going to happen. In the situation, everyone's like, why didn't you tell us you were unhappy? Why didn't you tell us you had struggles with this? And what if he had, leaned into community and opened up to people who were kind of that he could trust and say, hey, I'm actually not having a great time with this in my marriage, or I'm not I'm not as happy as I thought I should be in this. Can you help me? Can you guide me? Can you lead me? What if the community gave the right support, the right insight, the right encouragement to actually save the marriage before it ended? But unfortunately, what our instinct is to keep our struggles to ourselves and to say, I got this, I can take care of it, I'm strong enough. And what's scary is if we keep our struggles and our problems to ourselves, it might just all blow up in a way no one else saw coming but us.
Right. And I think we have this tendency to keep it surface level sometimes. Right. I was thinking about this last week as well. Everybody's got friends, just about. And we tend to share like the big things with our friends, right? New babies and proposals and all of the different things, new jobs and all that kind of stuff that makes up our life. All of the events that we would update on Facebook if we needed to. Those are the things that we share with the people around us. And we get joy and we get support and we get all of that stuff from that. We share kind of the big, giant, horrible things in life with people as well. When we lose jobs, when we lose loved ones, those are the things that we're throwing on people, and we experience support in those things as well. But in that moment of like when it comes to our faith, we have a tendency to shy away from it, which is totally counter to what you would expect, right? If we find joy in the support of our community in the small things, you would think that we would root down in the big things. And yet we totally fear doing that, I think.
Yeah, this is why I am a big believer in meeting regularly, maybe weekly or twice a month, just to connect and to have intentional questions that cause us to open up about our faith, about what we're going through, and about what we're experiencing. Because when we only open up about the big things, we never, it just doesn't provide the same closeness that could be happening if we open up on a regular basis. And I think we mentioned this briefly last week. Some of the questions I like to ask in small group setting. Mm-hmm. I had a small group a few years ago with a group of guys, and we got coffee every Monday. Mm-hmm. And we would ask each other a few questions, and those questions were: what is God teaching you? What are you struggling with? And struggle could be the sin that you're struggling to overcome, or the negative situation that's causing you to suffer. And if we still had time after those questions, we'd ask each other who we're reaching out to and try to keep each other accountable with that. And a lot of those weeks, this is weekly, and a lot of those weeks, the answers were pretty mundane. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, what is God teaching you? Well, I read this Bible verse. I guess like maybe God's trying to help me be a little more kind. Or I don't know what my biggest struggle is right now. I'm just a little like someone in my family's sick. Mm-hmm. It's not this big major thing that someone's opening up to.
Right. It doesn't always have to be a big major thing.
Right. And it's like, it's something you can practice. It's something you can develop. Just being regularly vulnerable, being regularly opening up can cultivate a life of community, even if the things you're opening up about aren't these big things. I think sometimes when people like us talk about opening up and being vulnerable, I think sometimes that gets interpreted as like, you need to have a conversation where you're crying your eyes out, and that's when that's being vulnerable.
Right. But it's the little things too. I think a lot of it is you won't fully know yourself until you allow yourself to be fully known by the people around you. And it's like building any relationship. I think of like with my girlfriend, all these little moments that we have where it's us realizing a new detail about each other that we didn't notice before. It's not just the moments where like I'm dealing with family drama and I'm like crying on the couch, right? Right. It's the little moments where I'm picking up new information about her or about myself, and just kind of in talking to her, realizing like, oh, this is a thing about me that I didn't fully have language for before. This is something about myself that I didn't understand, and it's because I wasn't actively verbalizing it to anyone.
That's good. I think it reminds me of just how one of my favorite descriptions of just the gospel and the hope that we have in God is that we can be fully known and fully loved by Him. Mm-hmm. That's ultimately what I feel like the best picture of what Christianity is about, is that God wants us to be fully known by Him and to be fully loved. And that our instinct is the opposite, right? We hide being known so that we can maintain people's love. But what community has the potential to do is put us like in that God role of saying to the other person, in the same way God wants to fully know you and fully love you, like the more I get to know you, and I will keep confirming that I love you, that we kind of get a taste of God's love through our relationships with one another.
Right. Ultimately, that is what community is. It is us getting to experience on a smaller scale what relationship with God is. And it is that ability to have somebody say to us physically in person, I see you, I know who you are, and I love you. And that's big.
It's huge.
That's life-giving.
Yeah. One thing I kind of want to point out before we totally move on is what are like maybe some practical little ways you add this intentional community element to your life. And I'll give you an example before I hear what you have to say.
Yeah, please do.
Scott, we love him as we
We
mentioned
very
earlier.
much love him. Scott, please come back.
He has this great knack of like asking a question that most of the time, like it feels so normal, but it's actually asking genuinely about us. Like usually when you walk by someone, you say, "Oh, how are you?" Like it feels like, oh, you're supposed to say like, "Good, how are you?" And it's more of a greeting. But there will be times where we're all at work or, you know, crossing paths here, and Scott will just drop a like, "Hey, how are you enjoying married life?" Or how are you, you know, doing with this? And it's got just a ounce of intentionality that makes it known that it's not just a greeting kind of like passerby conversation, but it brings a little more community element to our life and to our experience. And so I'm curious if you have any other like kind of more practically driven ways to incorporate a little more intention to our community.
Right. Well, I do think that is absolutely a great, easy end for people who are just beginning to learn what does it look like to be intentional with the people around them. Is keep in mind what are the things and who are the people that your people love. Right? There is a big difference between like how are you doing versus like how is married life. There is a real difference between sitting down with someone and just kind of chit-chatting about what's going on with you versus being like, "Hey, tell me about this thing. Like what were you up to last night? What big events have been going on in your life?" So I feel like especially the more that you are willing to sit and listen, that is kind of the biggest thing I've learned about community is we want to have the floor. We really want to express what's going on. And I think in a good community, there's always time for that. But being willing to lead with sitting and listening and asking questions about other people and intentionally, patiently listening to what they have to say. We have this problem where a lot of people tend to listen to what you have to say just so that they can wait their turn. Just so that like, okay, as soon as they're done with this thought, as soon as they've concluded and I've put in enough like tokens into this conversation to make it seem like I'm genuinely interested, I can talk next. And then like, man, I'm going to hit them with like this story. I'm going to hit them with this funny joke. I'm going to get like all the attention. And really it's learning to slow down and stop and listen and kind of just like wait your turn on a lot of that, I think is a big one.
Yeah. Listening is such an act of love and we don't even realize it. Because when you're listening to someone, you're saying, "You're worth my time. You're worth my attention." It's more what you have to say, the contribution you're about to make to my life is more important than the contribution my phone could make or my own thoughts could make or whatever else could distract me could make. And that is such a simple and practical way to be intentional with community is almost like see yourself on a mission to open up space for you to be a listener.
Yeah. And I think on that same note, empathy is a huge part of this, right? They go hand in hand. It's that realization of, you know, your situation in a way that I don't. You know what's going on in your life. You know what your experience has been. And I can't fully comprehend it, but I'm going to do my best to try. I'm going to sit there and listen without judging what I think your life experience has been. And in doing so, you're humbling yourself. And you're entering this role of understanding that, like, God has handed every single one of us a different little piece of truth. And I can gain yours from sitting and listening to you. And I didn't have that in the first place. And I think when we don't exercise that empathy, we're acting in pride, and we're sitting there assuming that we know what's best and that we know everything. And so essentially there's no need to listen to you. What you have to say is invalid. You are invalid because I understand your experience.
That's good. Love it. I don't even know what to add to that. I was just listening, not thinking about what to say next.
Tommy is great at community, in case you couldn't tell already. So hopefully next week, Scott will be back with us. We're really begging you, Scott. Please come back to us. We need you in our community. We hope that this series is kind of providing you guys with some tools and some resources. We're going to continue kind of talking through some of this as we look ahead. We're going to be moving into just kind of a lot of discussion about what does it look like to be intentional in general, not just in community, but in your own life. We look forward to that. Tommy, anything else for you to add?
No.
That's it. Tommy has met his word quota for the day. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. We will see you again next time.